Welcome back. I'm Amy Ellis, and this is Finishing Your Quilts on a Home Sewing Machine. Right now we're going to look at a few samples of some quilting that I've done in the past. I hope you enjoy it. This is one of my early samples that I made when I had a newborn, and I made this small 9 patch and just alternated the blocks and quilted in the diagonals here with a really light pink thread. We'll look more at matching your threads in a minute, but these, it's really simple. This is a great size for someone that's not quilted on their home sewing machine before to start with, because it's really manageable and easy to get under the needle. So something to consider. This next one is a little more recent. I quilted this one on my home sewing machine just a few years ago, and I brought it as an example of how you can integrate a bunch of different colors in your quilt top, in your quilting, and also just kind of the organic straight lines that you can get with your walking foot. So one thing to point out here is I put navy on the back, and if you're going to do a different top and bottom thread, you need to make sure your attention is really dialed in and just right. So we'll look at that some more too, just so you know, but it's a lot of fun, and I just pulled colors that were in the piecing for the quilting thread and had a lot of fun with adding that color and depth in the quilt top as well as in the piecing. So something else you can try. This one has some really straight lines, but they're all at different widths. So you can see how you could use some tape or maybe the edge of your walking foot to get different widths in between your quilting lines. And these are really just random, but they're all straight. And so we'll see how to do that also by using the guide on the side of your walking foot, that bar that I showed you earlier. I'll show you how to install that and then measure the distance between your needle and your next row of stitching. And it doesn't necessarily have to be measured, but if you want it to be wider than the last one, then you need to measure it a little bit. So now I have some samples of what we're going to do in this class. And I pieced some really simple quilts with different colors so that we could get some examples and experience on quilting on something pieced. So if you want to do the same thing, these are just 4.5-inch strips that I sewed together. And the lines are organic. They're not perfectly straight. They're not ideal, but they're perfect, and they're organic, and I love the texture. So don't get hung up on perfect, because it's really overrated. I really don't feel like it's necessary to have it be perfect and still be loved and used and admired, because this has its own appeal. So let's look at some color of thread and see what works best here. I really find that it's best just to pull out, whatever I might be considering to use and just look at it against the colors in the quilt top. So, and sometimes the ones that you don't expect to look good are the ones that really look good. So don't rule anything out until you've pulled it out of your, off the spool a little bit and really look at it. So some of these are blending more than others, and it really depends on what you like. So usually I look at the lightest color in the quilt top to see where it's going to blend, and then what doesn't stand out too much against the rest of the colors. So if you have a quilt that's mostly white but has some other colors in it, you might want to use a slightly off-white. I think I use this So Fine because it blends in really well with the white here, but then also over the top of these other colors it just kind of blends. It doesn't stand out like, say, this white one does. This one looks pretty shiny against the rest of the colors. So, and this gray could also work really well too. It really depends a lot on your personal preference and what you have on hand, because Sometimes that's really what it comes down to. So look at all the options and see which one you like the best, okay? And don't rule anything out until you've had a chance to see it against the cloth, because it changes when it's just one piece of thread versus a whole spool. So make sure you take it into consideration before you move on. So these organic straight lines are a lot of fun, and I'll show you how to quilt them in just a minute. These ones, they're a little bit straighter, a little bit closer together. A lot of fun to do, and the texture is really yummy. So if you're a quilter, you understand that, right? Let's look at some thread colors. For me, this one is really just too light. This gray looks pretty good. I think that's actually the one that I used. But you could also try an off color, off-white or kind of neutral. It depends on what you want to pick up in your quilt. If you want to pick up the brown undertones, that might be better. If you want to add drama, you might add some black. It really, it's up to you entirely. You're the decision maker in the process. So, and if you're having a really hard time, have a friend over and see what she thinks or he thinks. Maybe they see something different in it that you don't. So just lay it out and try to decide which is best for you. Some of these right off the bat are just too bright and not going to work for sure. And then, kind of narrow your options and go from there. So for me, it's got to be one of these two. And I know I used the gray one. So I'm going to look at how to get these lines nice and close and still keep them somewhat straight. They're not perfectly straight, but I'll show you how to do it. And it's a lot of fun, I think, to have that texture in there. One other thing, I'm going to pull up this next one and show you to think about when you're deciding on quilting is the density. It changes the texture. This one is pretty stiff, and this one is a little bit floppier. So depending on how you want to use your quilt, is it a baby quilt? Is it a wall hanging? That can really determine how you're going to quilt your quilt as well. And for this one, I used a ruler to mark my lines. And this one is at 60 degrees. So I used a ruler to mark it that way and put my tape down and went from there. So I'll show you more about that too. And again, let's look at color options. I'm going to pull this one out. It's nice and bright on the back, huh? There's, you could use a yellow in this one. Gray could work, although these are awfully warm, aren't they? So this is really what I go through each time I'm getting ready to quilt something. I look at all the options and try to determine what's going to fit best with my quilt and really what I want to highlight. And if I don't want to highlight anything, I really just want it to blend in, then I'm going to pick the one that really blends the best with all the colors. And sometimes it's not what you think. So make sure that you take the time to investigate thoroughly. This is a crosshatch, and like I showed you on that first quilt with the 9 patches, it's done in the same way. So you can use your 60-degree line on your ruler, or you can use 45. And some rulers have more markings than others, so you can investigate and see, if you draw it on a piece of paper, what you come up with for a design. And you could do it more than once. You could have multiple lines going through these on some of them and not on others, and just decide what look is what you want in your quilt top. So I hope you got your homework done. I have some fabric and batting that I'm ready to baste, and I'm going to show you exactly how you need to do that here. I have 2 solid pieces of fabric and a piece of batting, and they're all about the same size. So I'm just gonna set the top two aside for now. When I'm practicing my quilting, I like to use solid because then I can see all of my stitches easier. And I can also, I don't feel like I'm wasting the pretty prints. So, but if you have fabrics that you're not in love with anymore, that's the perfect place to use them as well. I'm gonna tape this piece of fabric straight to the table so that we can baste it. And why I'm doing that is to keep the back taut without being stretched at all. And that helps to eliminate wrinkles in your backing when you're quilting. So sometimes it's, if I was, oops, that's popped up. If I was quilting or basting a larger piece, a lot of times I end up on the floor in the kitchen. And it's not always easy, but once I get it done, it's done, and then I can move on to the fun part in quilting. So, and you might even ask your, friends to help or kids to help, and someone that can get on the floor easier. But I'm just looking to eliminate all the excess fabric, so it's pulled tight so that it's not moving anywhere, so that when I pin through the layers, it doesn't shift at all. So I'm gonna press those down nice and good. The slow tack tape is great because it doesn't leave any residue on your fabric, but sometimes it needs a little extra encouragement to stay where you want it. So, all right, so then we have our batting. And battings, there's so many options for battings. This is a cotton poly blend. It's about 80% cotton, 20% polyester. It's a commonly found batting by Warm Company, and I'm just smoothing out all the wrinkles. So if you have a folded batting, you might want to press it to make sure that there's no wrinkles in there. And something that I always do with my backing fabric is starch. I like the crispness that it gives to the fabric. That way I can't really pull it out of square either. And it helps it to glide over the machine bed as well. So that's one thing that I like to make sure to do. With the battings, there's also, there's wool, there's, a straight polyester, which I don't necessarily recommend for a beginner quilter. There's usually a lot of loft, and it can be hard to wrestle that under the machine. So look for cotton. There's also wool battings. There's soy, bamboo. There's all sorts of kinds of batting. So look for what works best for you and your budget, because they all vary in price. And some of them drape differently than others, so it's just going to be a matter of trying them and seeing what you like best. So now I have these layers all nice and flat. If you're working with a larger piece, you'll want to start in the center and really just smooth everything out as much as you possibly can. And you'll notice once you start pinning as well that it'll smooth out more as you go. So just kind of keep smoothing and smoothing as you work. I like to start in the center. That way everything works out from that point. So, and then I'm looking for 5 to 6 inches between each of the pins. And once you've tried pinning, I know it looks like I'm just kind of pinning randomly, but I can feel the pin go through the layers of fabric and batting and then hit the back of the table. So I know that it's got the 3 layers. And if you don't necessarily trust it, once you get up here near the top, you can see how it's got all the layers together that way. So it works, I promise. So I'm pinning and smoothing, and if any of these pieces of tape pop up, I'm just kind of re-adhere them to the table or floor, wherever you're working. And you'll want to pin all the way out and make sure that your corners are secure and your edges as well. One thing to look for in your batting is the washing instructions. Do you want to be able to wash it? Do you want to have it hanging on the wall? Different battings have different purposes, so that's something to consider as well. And if it's going to be used for a baby versus an adult bed, you know, different things. You'll need to be able to wash a baby quilt a lot more for sure. And the care instructions could be more laborsome if, you know, for the new baby. So make sure that you take all those things into consideration. So that one wasn't catching. There we go. So now that we have everything layered up and basted, we're gonna take off all the tape so that it is free to move. And we're gonna mark a couple of straight lines. So this process, it really depends on how big it is, but once you get comfortable with basting, you'll get faster at it, I promise. And it's great for, you know, keeping all the layers together easily. Something this size, I don't always put a ton of pins in because it's not going to take a lot, but for this class and to show you, I wanted to make sure that you saw exactly how I base my quilts. So now it's free to move. You can see I pinned all the way through all the layers. There might be a little pucker there, so I might go back and adjust that one, make sure it's all the way smooth. But it looks good. It's ready to quilt. So we are going to add a few lines of tape to our quilt top here so that we can practice some straight lines. And I like to use my ruler to get something straight. And I'm going to aim for where I don't have a lot of pins right here. Keep it simple. So you can do this at intervals however you like. And I'm going to just pick a big long strip of tape here and line it right up along the edge. Just like that. Press it down good and then probably take off the extra so that it doesn't get stuck on you or your machine as you're quilting. So make sure it's nice and stuck. And then we're going to measure over. And this, it doesn't have to be super precise. What I'm doing is giving myself an area to quilt in instead of the entire thing. Because if I give myself the entire area, then I tend to drift in one direction or another. So if I give myself a smaller area, then I can keep it between those two lines of tape much easier. So if you find yourself drifting as you quilt, there's an easy solution for it, and it works pretty much every time. So I've measured over, let's see, about 4 inches. And I'm just gonna make sure that tape is nice and snug up to the ruler so it's straight. And then lay it down there. So we already attached our walking foot. So let's look at getting started with your quilting. And one thing I will say before I move to the machine is don't fold it. You've taken so much time to get all your layers nice and smooth and flat. The last thing you want to do is introduce a fold now. So what I do is I actually roll it and keep it in a roll as much as it will. If you're working with a bigger quilt, it's definitely easier to roll it. So, but that reduces the bulk that you're dealing with under the machine arm and keeps it from getting a wrinkle or a fold line. So be sure to work on that. And then we're just gonna come over here, and I'm using red thread. in my machine now, so you can see my stitch lines, but I would use something different, obviously, like we talked about before. So you can start, usually I like to start within the, where the binding will be attached when I'm doing straight line quilting. If there's any pins in the way, you're gonna wanna go ahead and just carefully remove them, just one at a time. If you need to stop while you're stitching and take out the next one, that's totally fine and what you should do instead of taking it out early. I'm just gonna stitch a line and make sure that my stitch length and the tension and all those little details are good. So let's try it out. I'm following right along the edge of the foot with the tape so that my line's nice and straight. And when you're stitching, you need to make sure that you're letting the machine do the work. So don't hang on too tight to your quilt. Just let your hands relax so that the quilt can move freely under the needle. All right, that's enough. Let's just take it out and see what we've got here. So I have some nice long stitches, and my tension looks good too. So we're in good shape. So we can continue on stitching just in the same way. Now, if you're having trouble, there's a couple of things you can do. Rethread your machine is the first one. Make sure that it's all happy going on there in the machine. And then if you haven't switched your needle or cleaned your machine, that's something you need to do now to make sure that it's gonna give you the best stitch length and tension and without any trouble. So let's stitch again, and this time I'm gonna put my presser foot, the edge, right next to the line of stitching that I did previously. And oops, I went a little bit over. Sometimes it can take a couple tries to get it right, but once you're ready, you're good to go. So, and again, my hands are loose and I'm not hanging on really tight. And if I need to adjust my hands, I stop. That way my machine doesn't, start to veer off of the path that I had set it on. So this looks really good. If you're having, you might want to look at your stitch length. This one looks nice, but you could maybe lengthen it a little bit if you want your stitching to stand out more. You can also adjust your tension if your threads are showing differently front and back. One thing that I like to do is put a different color bobbin in to test the tension and make sure that the layer, the threads are sitting evenly on the fabric. So if you're having trouble, you can take out the bobbin and put a different one in and make sure that it's, and then you can easily troubleshoot and see which way your tension needs to go. We'll talk more about tension later when we free measure and quilt, because it's definitely more challenging to get it right then. So this is how you do the straight lines, and we can also do some more organic lines. And to do that, I hold on to it even looser. And I usually give it a little bit of a curve. And I'll show you what I did. Sometimes I follow it pretty exact, and other times it's just a little bit curvy. But you remember the organic lines, the sample that I showed you earlier, it was not perfect. It was just kind of, free range a little bit. So that's a nice look. And you can always, when you go back and do the next one, you can start really close and come in and go back and forth. So if you're gonna do the longer rows in between, I have my spacing bar, and sometimes these click in and sometimes they just are inserted like this one. It depends on your machine, so you never know. You have to figure out which way your machine works. So this one, it slides in and you have all that room to adjust it and move with it. I just grab my ruler. So we can measure from the needle So I have it in the center position, and I can measure out 2 inches. So I'm gonna adjust this so that it's right at the 2-inch mark, and I'll show you here. So my needle's here, and it's all lined up with this 2-inch line on my ruler, and then this is the exterior edge. So if we were gonna sew this way, I know my lines are gonna overlap a little bit, but that's okay. I'll show you how to follow along. So it's a little bit different because in the past we're following the left side, and now we're gonna follow the right side. So here, my spacing bar is lined up on the tape here instead of on the left. So, and actually, why don't we adjust this once more? I'm gonna put it on the outside of the tape so that it's not overlapping. So here it's on the right side of the tape now, and we're ready to stitch some more. So I'm just following along right here. And as mesmerizing as it can be, I don't encourage you to actually watch your needle. I find I get dizzy watching the needle because it usually is going so fast. So it's better just to watch where you're going or where you're lining up instead of watching the needle, because it's not going to help you, for one, because your line's going to be all over the place instead of where you want it to be. And then also it would just be distracting. So follow this all the way down. And when I'm quilting with the walking foot, I usually just start and end in the space where the binding will be eventually. So I don't really have to worry a whole lot about knotting my threads. So now I have this nice straight line here next to the tape, and we can continue on in that vein in the same way. So if we look closer here, I'm going to put this back under so you can see it better. But if you look here, if your needle's in the center position, you can use the inside of your foot here, this line, to mark the difference, or to use as a guide, or you can use the outside of the line, or of the foot rather. So, and you can do that on both sides. So if you're quilting really closely, those lines or those guidelines might be better to use than the exterior foot. So today we've basted our quilt and gotten some good stitching lines in with the walking foot, and your assignment before the next lesson is to go ahead and baste a couple of quilt sandwiches together and practice stitching with your walking foot. You can decide which lines you like better, and just get a really good feel for it. So test all your settings, make sure all the pieces are happy in your quilt, and remember to relax. Don't get all bunched up and hold on too tight to your quilt. So we'll be back next time with more walking foot ideas for you to put into practice.